the Earth and the Moon and how it was set in the solar system to rotate around the sun was done in a very specific way, done intentionally. It wasn't done haphazardly at all. You can take the same system I just described now, probably rather badly, and do it for any other planet in the solar system. You can get another system of measurement for angles. And I actually did that for Mars.
Episode of the Sharpening Report. And before we get started, I just want to stop and say thank you guys so much. It's been about 3 or 4 months since I took over the Sharpening Report, and it has been an absolute blast. I just redid the Sharpening Report website, which is sharpeningreport.com. There is no the. And a few people have donated to the Sharpening Report, which just speaks so much to me that you guys are willing to support me that way. I really, really appreciate it. I love the prayers, and I love the conversations in the comments below. So guys, I just wanted to take a minute before we get started to say thank you so much. It has been a true joy to be able to do these interviews with great guests and bring you quality content. So I thought we would, before we got started, we'd celebrate with some pie. So everyone grab some pie and sit down and eat and enjoy it, because oddly enough, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today is pie. And, well, not the food pie, even though that would probably make a great GMO episode, which we'll do sometime down the road. We're going to be talking about the number pie. And to do that, we are joined by Mark Flynn. Mr. Flynn is author of The Forbidden Secrets of the Labyrinth and has done many great blogs and has actually been on the Sharpening Report before to discuss many interesting things like the numbers. Why is there 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour? Why is there 360 degrees in a circle? Where does that number come from? And all other sorts of ancient wisdom. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, Mr. Flynn, how are you doing today?
Very good. Very good, Sam. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, it's good to have you back. It's been a long time since you were here. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So before we get started, why don't you just give us a little bit of a background on who you are and where you came from?
Well, the name's Mark Flynn. David Flynn was my brother, and he wrote a couple books that people have appreciated over the years. His first one was Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars, and the second one was Temple at the Center of Time. And he passed away in 2012, and I wrote my book, in 2014. And Josh, I met Josh Peck soon after that, and talked to him on his show at the time. And I haven't really done too much since then, except I've been writing on my blog. But, who doesn't have a blog?
You definitely touch on some really interesting topics, which is why I wanted to have you on the show, is because we go throughout our days and we think of, there's 24 hours in a day. And then we never really understand, well, why is there 24 hours in a day? Or the biggest one is, where does 360 degrees even come from? So talk about that. You did some blogs recently that were really fascinating. Talk about the 360 degrees.
The whole thing started with me when someone did a clickbait sort of resurrection of this guy's website back from, I think, it was like 1997 or 2008. I think he's had it up since 97. His name is John Charles Webb. And he was the first one that noticed that the speed of light in kilometers happened to look very close to the latitude in decimal degrees of the Great Pyramid. So that, that kind of went viral for a while. It was about a year ago, but it was regurgitated internet knowledge, and I'd never seen it before. And of course, everybody scoffed at it and said, well, that's ridiculous, because the Egyptians didn't use meters. And, well, first of all, when I hear something like that, I think, well, did the Egyptians actually build the pyramids? I say no. A lot of people would say no. Someone else did. but there's more to it than that. I think just writing it off just right away like that is not wise. People should look at it. And the first thing I thought about was how peculiar the meter was. And the meter is interesting because it's related to this group that came about just after Sir Francis Bacon's book, The New Atlantis. And that book inspired a bunch of philosophers and scientists in London to form a society, and they call themselves a Royal Society. And they're still around today. And it was a guy named, a society member named John Wilkins, who said that he'd like to propose a new measurement system based on the pendulum. So that's sort of a long story about why I'm starting to think about what the meter is. And the specifics behind what he meant by what the pendulum was is an equation which I'll get to. But nothing was really done with his idea for a while. But later, after the French Revolution, the French Scientific Society, I'm not really clear on what they call themselves, decided that they were going to adopt the meter, but not, they weren't going to define it the way that the Royal Society defined the meter. Instead, they were going to say that this new length unit was 1/10,000,000th of the meridian from going through Paris, the Paris meridian, or the Masons would say it's the golden meridian. It's not used anymore, but that distance from the North Pole to the equator, 1/10,000,000th, and that's kind of an arbitrary thing to say what this new measurement unit would be, which I think is peculiar. Of course, the Paris Society would not be interested in anything that the aristocracy had come up with, or anything with the word royal in it. You know, the British, we're not going to do, we're going to do our own thing. So here's our meter. And time went on after that, and Europe, or the French specifically, did say that the meter was a certain length. And this is an arbitrary thing. They said, well, the meter is this. We have a meter bar, and at a specific temperature, these two marks define what it is. And that was the first definition of what it was. Later on, though, the meter was defined as a certain amount of wavelengths of krypton. It was adopted after this an actual meter convention I think they had in Paris in like the mid 1800s. And today, going all the way to today, they define the meter in this strangely circular fashion of it being the distance that light travels. Right? The speed of light is how far light travels in a vacuum in a time interval of 299,792,458 of a second. That is what the definition of meter is today.
Wow.
Which is really strange. So all that being said, now I'll get back to the pendulum, the idea of what that meter should be. So Wilkins proposed that the meter be based on the pendulum because on Earth, a pendulum has a certain period because of the force of gravity that is specific here. If you went where the force of gravity is different, then the same length of a pendulum wouldn't keep the same time. The time he wanted to propose was a 1 second pendulum, and actually what that means is that the pendulum arm would swing from one side to the other in 1 second. So 1, 2. So it actually takes 2 seconds. So the period for this equation is 2. And now you have a length and you have a constant for the acceleration of gravity, or just a value for the acceleration of gravity on Earth. Since the meter is already defined to be a certain length, you come out with a value that's kind of peculiar, that struck me as peculiar. And if people look at it, and I think the equation probably would be helpful to see, it's very close to pi squared, and other people have noticed this too. So what's that saying? So what that is saying is, if you have a pendulum and you make sure the period's 2 seconds, the length of that pendulum on Earth will be very close to a meter. The French finally came out with a value that doesn't work for this Earth, if that makes any sense. It's a bit too long by just a small amount, by like 0.06%. And the peculiar thing about that is that if you happen to increase the value of gravity on Earth to pi squared, it would be exactly what the meter is defined today to be. So going back to the pyramid, what that means is, if the people who built the pyramid really knew about a certain distance or a certain measurement based on the acceleration of gravity on Earth, they would also have to know that the definition of latitude and how we measure that angle system on Earth was something that could be knowable as well by the people that they're demonstrating this to in the future.
It doesn't really seem possible that they would know that complicated factor of getting a meter. And isn't it and just to be more specific, the pyramids are on a latitude line that is equal to what the speed of light is? Can you explain kind of what that is?
The decimal degree latitude of the pyramid is 1/10,000,000th of what the meter value of the speed of light is. And that makes any sense. It's correct to 7 decimal places. I think I have a picture of it on my blog here. And it doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. But then I had to step back and think, after thinking about how the meter came about, that it's actually based on something that's a constant, something that you can repeat. Going back to that idea about the meter, if you take a pendulum and you're using 2 seconds as your period, you can't go anyplace else in the solar system and get anything that's close to what a meter is. If you were on Jupiter, for example, the meter length would have to be much longer. And I keep saying meter, I just mean unit of length. We call it a meter, which means to measure. If you go on Mars, it would be shorter for the 2 second period to work.
Yeah, and so the distance is relative because the gravity is different because...
Exactly. So only on Earth would that distance equal that angular measurement distance of where the pyramid is in north latitude. But, I mean, then you stop there. Say, well, how the Egyptians know about our angular measurement system? In fact, they didn't use an angular measurement system. They used some other ratio that people talk about. Again, I don't think it was the Egyptians that built the pyramid, but this idea of going and looking at the Earth and thinking, okay, if there's going to be a measurement system for Earth, why not base it on the Earth? Mm-hmm. Make it an Earth-centric system of measurement, mm-hmm. of angular measurement. And you can do that, actually. And I'm kind of working backwards the way people think. Pythagoras understood, and a lot of the ancients understood, that the pentagram that within a circle is symbolic of the cycle of the aeons, because as the Earth precesses, it takes 72 years for 1 degree of it to progress around its circuit. And that symbol of the pentagram inscribed inside of a circle, or an Ouroboros, which is image of a snake eating its tail, that symbolized the cycle of the aeons. If you multiply 360, which is the circle, how we measure circles, times 72, you get how long it takes for one complete cycle of the precession. And so that number is 25,920 years. Now, I'm saying years. There's no such thing in my scenario right now as a year. All that you can do looking at the Earth is base it on Earth-centric values, and the Earth has a period that it takes to go around the sun. So if you're talking about precession, you're saying that the Earth goes around the sun 25,920 times before the Earth completes one cycle of precession. So it's just a ratio I'm talking about. It's not anything that anybody already knows about, like a year. It means nothing.
Right.
It's just a ratio, something you can look at and see.
Right.
There's also other sort of universal constant ideas that I bring into the mix that seem to me, especially from a Christian standpoint, to be very important. And at this point, too, I need to talk about the need for a belief in God to have a foundation right off the bat, to be able to grasp sort of what these concepts are. Because if you have no belief in God at all, and from that an understanding kind of the genesis of mankind on Earth, this very Earth-centric sort of thing that's going on between man and God, and angelic kind as well. What I'm going to talk about really is just absolute foolishness.
So wait, you're telling me that science and Christianity are going hand in hand? Now that goes against every atheist I've ever talked to ever. So
yeah, it seems to me there's been a campaign of late too to kind of denigrate that sort of thing that's going on. The scientific, or people, or Christians who think, right? I know I'm going to insult some people listening to this. The flat Earth campaign is obvious psyop to mix something ridiculous with Christianity, right? You know, there's people actually paid to go out there and say ridiculous things and link them with Christians. And actually, it's been fairly effective. You know, it started about the middle of the second Obama term, I noticed, and it really kind of was astounding to me that people, you know, actually got into it so much. And I noticed a definite sort of interjection of all this stuff in like my YouTube pages and Facebook. I was seeing them, you know, all of a sudden pop up. I never went to them. Anyway, getting back to that idea, I also you can't become a Mason unless you have a belief in God. In they understand that there's nothing more that can be learned if there isn't that base. But so, you know, stepping back and looking at the Earth from that perspective, as a Christian, you would know that the Genesis of man was there at Eden. And there's a very specific item that the ancients, and especially the people that are interested in geometry, are fixed on. And that's the thing that my brother called the Pyrus Sidonia, which is a scientific name for the quince. And a lot of other fruit have this quality, but if you cut it longitudinally, you'll notice that there's 5 seeds. And that pentagon is the third regular polygon, right? So in universal constants, something like an equilateral triangle, a square, and a pentagon are something that don't need numbers or don't need any measurement system. There's something, the concepts that could be understood universally, right? The only thing you need are the idea of integers like 1, 2, 3. So the third regular polygon, the pentagon, is key in this equation that I'm talking about. This idea of God's creation of man, God's interjection of his presence with man, and later on this fruit and this other incursion of this light bringer, this satanic being, right, or the Nakash coming into the garden, all arrives at this fruit, right, this fruit event. Later on, in Genesis 3:14 of all numbers, this light bringing angel that corrupts that relationship with man and God gets his curse. That cycle begins where he has dominion over this realm, and God's left paradise and left man with the curse and with this creature under control.
So these are the roots of our society. Is God set this up in a very specific way, our world in a very specific way, and it's our job to kind of understand how he set it up so we can better understand the world around us. And so when we get to the Garden of Eden, it's like, all right, so it's our introduction to this world of the world in time and measurement. And so Satan comes in and he understands it better than we do, and almost as well as God does, because he was there during creation. So I guess my question is, I've always heard that the pentagon or pentagram is a very satanic thing. But you're kind of saying that it's a part of creation. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it points to something that we all have to deal with every day. That idea of what happened when Eve took the fruit, the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and did the one thing that God told her not to do. Everything changed. Suddenly there was death. Suddenly there was a need for work, and also a need for a unit of exchange, because now people could work or give portions of their life, right, towards work, and then exchange whatever they produced, right, in this place, this domain that's no longer paradise. And in fact, money itself is a symbol of that coin, that idea, that fruit. People are exchanging it. Here's a portion of my life that commemorates the time that Eve took that yellow round object and did what God told her not to do. But its actual shape is five-sided. And that's a sort of a quintessential point that everything starts at. And if you're, say, hovering over the earth and looking at it, you have the fact that man was created on earth. God was with man on earth in a perfect state. That state changed, and there was a reason for that state changing. And the symbol for that reason, is that pentagon, which is a symbol of that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. My brother talked about that extensively, and the idea of what the Pyrosidonia is. He went into that in depth. I mentioned a lot of the information about how it's related to money and how it's being corrupted today and its future. But that five-sided figure is very key to understanding where our measurement system, at least our angular measurement system, came from. And, people will say, well, the 360 degree or the system that's based on 60 or base 60 came from the Babylonians, and before that the Sumerians. But there's nowhere you can go and find the answer to why they chose base 60. There's a lot of theories, and mine, of course, is another theory. But what I'm saying is, you can derive an equation from what I'm proposing, these elements, the ratio of the Earth's rotation around the sun and how long it takes to process. 5-sided figure, the regular polygon, and what it symbolizes. Just those 3 things, or 2 things basically, 5 and 25,920, you can come up with a system that measures angles, because the circle can be thought of as the unit for all angular measurement, right? And we use 360 because it comes from the Babylonians, that base 60 system. I won't talk about the specific equation. It's very basic. I have it on my webpage. But what it does is it derives, first of all, the separation between each of the 5 sections of a pentagon. The number 72. You get the number 72. And it's strange that number 72 also has significance in the light of Christian thought.
Definitely the fallen angels, 72 fallen angels is just one that I think of off the top of my head.
Right. I've also heard of geotetic positioning of angelic beings. I've met a lot of people. Don't go there. That's, don't talk about it. But so basically from that equation, you can get the separation of 72. It's laid out and defined on my blog, SeriousTwins.com. And if you go to Discover Meeting, it's the blog entry called The Pyrrhus Sidonian, the Origin of 360 Degrees. But when you finally get to the last part of the equation, 5 times 72 is 5 times 72 is 360. That gives you, because there's 5 sections in the pentagon, and now you've defined the number 72 to each of those portions. So the circle, therefore, is 360. With the circle being 360, then you can assign the value to the angles of all the other regular polygons. The first being the equilateral triangle, and that's an important unit as well, because for the first regular polygon, the simplest one possible to make, you get the 60. You get the 60 base units that are used by the Babylonians and the Sumerians. And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying an Earth-centric system that's based on understanding that God is interested in it and man came from it, and also the angels are involved, and God himself also comes down as a man for a specific purpose, is an astounding thing to the whole universe. It's a very important place on Earth. And after thinking this way, I didn't just think, well, this is a theory about how numbering, or at least a measurement system or angular measurement system, could come about. I started to think the Earth and the moon and how it was set in the solar system to rotate around the sun was done in a very specific way, done intentionally. It wasn't done haphazardly at all. You can take the same system I just described now, probably rather badly, and do it for any other planet in the solar system. You can get another system of measurement for angles, and I actually did that for Mars, and the results are on my page, my blog page as well. But so far I've only described an angular measurement system. You need something for time as well, and I just basically did the same thing. If you are looking at a pentagon and you've derived from what I've said 72 degrees for each of the 5 sections, the outlying angles now that are left for each of these 72 degrees are 288. So that 288 again times 5 equals the amount of minutes in 24 hours. In 24 hours, I've gotten ahead of myself, because all I wanted to do is say, okay, we need a basic increment of time, and that's undefined so far. But the Earth does rotate at a certain rate, and a day takes a certain time, like sunset to sunset. Let's divide them up into 1,440 increments. Mm-hmm. We call them minutes, and it's just another extension of that same idea.
So what you're saying is our unit of measurement is based on the pentagram, basically?
It's based on the fact that the Earth was set in the specific way it was. The way its rate of precession, which is important, and the rate of precession as it's related to its rate of rotation around the sun, and the Pyrrhocydonia, or the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. That is what this world is based on. This is the realm we live, and it is based on the fact that we fell from paradise.
God set up the universe in a very specific way, and we are just trying to identify kind of how God set it up and how they work hand in hand. Is that more accurate to say?
Yeah, that's not necessarily more accurate, but as accurate as before. I mean, you look at it a lot of different ways. I've stopped sort of trying to argue with myself a lot of the time. Just say, the pentagon basically is not something that Satan invented. See, Satan doesn't invent anything. He usurps ideas and he corrupts them. Mm-hmm. A regular polygon is something definitely that Satan didn't invent, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people get confused about what I'm saying, and I don't like to delve into a lot of this because it gets dark and kind of depressing. It's like, well, the enemy thinks this way and the fallen angels do this, and they're, this is the kind of game that they've been playing. And if you look into mythology, you see a lot of the stuff they've been doing. People have to understand, I'm looking at this from a foundation of being a Christian, understanding what God has done for me, and that Emmanuel was here, right? God was with us, and he died and rose, and I can have eternal life through him. And that's a mind-blowing fact, that the angels despise me for understanding and believing. And if people are sort of just coming in to my site and reading just a little bit, I've had people misinterpret what I'm saying, saying, well, I had someone actually type that he hated people that worship Satan. So, you obviously read everything that I was writing, but
it's kind of a hard topic to wrap your head around, and I think the biggest thing is what kind of prevented me in the past from really diving into this is my next question for you. How does this affect Christians on a day-to-day basis? So we talked about that God made this world. So what does it mean for us?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because it had a great impact on me. Just going back to the pyramid, and someone saying, well, it seems to be some correlation with its location on Earth and the speed of light in meters, And so going through the machinations of trying to figure out, well, where did our measurement system come from? And getting to where I am right now, I do understand that, for example, the moon was set exactly in a perfect position that it is in the mass, in the density that it is, as it is right now. The Earth was made specifically for, at a certain mass and density, and placed out at a certain distance from the sun, intentionally. Before I kind of had this idea that things might have happened. God set the universe into motion, and maybe the Earth turned out to be a good place for mankind. For Eden, for everything that's gone on since then. Just randomly, maybe, or God had it set up and it just sort of worked that way. I'm thinking now that there might have been a day, it's almost as if now I can believe that there was this huge hand of God taking the Earth and setting it right where it needed to be. I mean, it was that intentional and that direct, a direct action that God did to make the Earth and the moon and what we are experiencing in this universe the way it is right now. It helped my faith. I have no doubt. I mean, for me, it's a faith supporter, and for other people, I hope it would be too. A lot of people just write off the things I say as completely crazy. That's okay though. But maybe I'm hoping for other people it will increase their faith, or maybe wake them up. For people that have no faith, or that may be agnostic or whatever it happens to be. If this is approached the right way, there may be people that come to it who are not Christian, or have rejected God or whatever. Maybe this is some angle that they can understand or kind of think about, and maybe it would help.
Yeah, when you see the number of coincidences and like the same numbers get used over and over and over, it's right. And you think about evolution and how it kind of just happened, but it doesn't make sense. And guys, I would really urge you to go to Mark Flynn's website. It's in the link below, and really read through the blogs that we've been talking about, because it's so much easier to kind of sit down and go at your own pace and read it, and then reread it, and then reread it again, like I had to do, to really grasp everything. And it's a very, very interesting theory. And another theory that you kind of touch on in those blogs, and I was wondering if you could talk about now, is how these certain, we talked about the pyramid, but there's a lot of other ancient megastructures that are placed on certain lines on the Earth. And kind of, how does that play, and what does that mean? How does that play into our world?
Well, that idea, again, about 72 degrees being an important number. My brother discovered this. I think he was the first one that mentioned it, that a lot of the megalithic sites on this planet are at 70 degree locations, 70 degree latitude, looking down at the Earth, actually, at the North Pole. And the idea that there's megalithic structures on the Earth is something that's overlooked by modern academic archaeologists. They completely just disregard it and throw it out. To them, man was a society, or if you could call it a society, that didn't have a knowledge of the wheel 10,000 years ago. But if you look at a lot of these sites, you see contrary evidence. There was some level of high technology going on that can't be duplicated today. So my brother asked these questions and said, well, what could it be if it wasn't man? Or if it was man, how did mankind have that information and that type of technology? And how come we have no idea today? In fact, why do we deny it? And so it's sort of a good segue to go back into the involvement of Mars in our ancient mythology. The Romans were really into Mars and worshiping Mars, and their legends were about the gods that inhabited Mars, the actual planet Mars. And there's good evidence for megalithic structures there as well. And my brother talked about that. You could kind of crystallize the subject of Cydonia, the secret chronicles of Mars. It would be that there were angelic civilizations that existed on that planet. You're talking millions of years ago, before it was destroyed. And its destruction had something to do with the fall of Lucifer. Now that sounds really, really crazy.
Yeah.
When people to me and said, asked me, does your brother really believe that? Or what's the book about? And then I say, what I said to you, and they just look at me like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. But there's no doubt that there has been some type of civilization on our planet that had the ability to make massive structures that we have there's no way what we can do with all our resources and all our money. We can't duplicate the pyramid. We can't build a Latte Tambo. We can't go to Baalbek and put something like the Trilithon up. Yeah, unless we have some type of anti-gravity technology.
So, and as Christians, we have to look at these things and we have to take them into account. How did they get? How did the pyramid become? How did like, what is Stonehenge? Like, what are these things? Like, how do they fit into our Christian worldview? And if you are just a Christian that's just going to ignore it,
we can't ignore it. You can't say I'm a Christian and then be willfully ignorant. You can't. The two will not mix. Right? You have to go out and ask questions and search for the answers. And if you're willing to do that, the answers are things that contrary to a lot of people will think. You're not going to have cognitive dissonance and have more difficulty being a Christian. Rather, you're going to have an increase in understanding, and thereby your faith will come as well, be more easy for you. And I think there's a lot of people that appreciate that idea, but there's this thing going on, and I think that's one of the reasons for that campaign, that Flat Earth campaign too. Christians are actually benefiting from other Christians going out and doing logical research, and asking these harder questions and coming up with ideas and answers, perhaps some theories that make sense. That's bad, because it's actually helping Christianity along. We want to throw a rock into that a little, see if we can stop that from going on. So anyway, the next thing would be, I guess, going back to the pendulum equation, we have time now defined by that same process. And the fact is that there is a group of people on Earth right now who have the knowledge to have made the meter the size that it is, so that it actually matches the latitude, decimal latitude of the Great Pyramid. Because the 2-second pendulum wasn't actually the equation that was used to define the length of the meter. It was arbitrarily defined. And then later, now it's circularly defined by the speed of light, which is another sort of flag to me that there's something very important going on with what the meter is, what it represents. But that value, pi squared, is universal. Pi is a number that is anywhere in the universe, and you can square it, of course, and come up with that same number, and it works in that equation. If you use the length value, and you just say that's going to be the unit I'm going to use, and you go to some place that has the gravity that Earth has, and you increase, so if I say that a different way, if you have the gravity of Earth at 45 degrees, and that was actually suggested by some French mathematician back in like the early or late 1700s for how they wanted to use the pendulum to define the length of the meter, which they never did. If you do that, the actual strength of the gravity on Earth is like 0.0 or 0.6 or 0.06 too weak, or too it's if you use that to define the meter, your meter's going to be slightly too short. for it to work, to be that distance, to match that northern latitude of the Great Pyramid. But in fact, the meter is the right distance, the right length. And that can only mean that whoever decided to make it that length knew that it had to match up to the distance from the equator to the Great Pyramid. And if that's the case, and it works out perfectly, you increase the value of gravity on Earth to pi squared to get that length.
Huh.
Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If I don't have the equation, it's hard to. I say it kind of circularly, and I don't know if people are following me, but there's three variables in that equation. There's time, which is always set to 2. There's length, and then there's small g, which is the value for gravity, right? Mm-hmm. But if we're using that equation, we are always using a known unit of length. We're using meters in it, or feet, or whatever it happens to be. And the acceleration of gravity on Earth in meters is 9.8, roughly. Mm-hmm. But pi squared is 9.8696044. You have to increase the gravity by a slight amount to get exactly the meter that we have using the pendulum equation. Talking about the people that have this knowledge, right? This august group, and I'm talking about Freemasonry, the Illuminated.
Yeah, let's talk about. So you kind of alluded to the people who have these things and the beings that brought them with them. So let's sit down and talk about them right now.
So after I've said all this about deriving measurement systems, based on Earth-centric ideas, obviously there's a group that already knows this. Because the meter was set to the value it was. Good example of this would be also the development of the Fahrenheit temperature scale. And it's extremely Masonic. And people would say, that's ridiculous. No, it absolutely is. It absolutely is Masonic. Daniel Fahrenheit came up with this idea of we need a new scale of temperature, or a way to measure temperature. And strangely, he came up with the idea that 32 would be the freezing mark. But what he's doing is he's honoring this illuminated god. And you call him by a lot of different names, like Hermes the Thrice Great. Mm-hmm. Heard of that? Or Harpocrates.
The architect.
Yeah. That symbol, that equilateral triangle, again, is Hermes the Thrice Great. What perfect number to make freezing, the freezing point of this, than the triple point, the temperature for water. But before you do that, you have to go back to this relationship, Mars and Earth. Now, I need to talk about a nautical mile. The definition of a nautical mile is just, if you take any sphere or any circle, there's 360 degrees, and there's 60 minutes in each degree. Each one of those minutes is also a nautical mile on Earth, if you look at the equator. That's the definition of a nautical mile. You can have bigger spheres or smaller, like Mars is smaller. And without talking about the actual numbers, of course, you still have the same amount of minutes, 360 times 60 on Mars, but they're smaller. On Earth, we say the minutes are a nautical mile. On Mars, they're not a nautical mile. They're somewhat smaller. The fact is, and you can go out and verify this, go to NASA's site and get the average circumference of Earth, average circumference of Mars, that only 32 Earth-sized minutes will fit into a Mars degree. Let's say that again. 32 minutes are taken out of an Earth-sized degree. There's actually 60 of them, but you can only fit 32 Earth-sized minutes in one Mars degree.
Interesting.
So that Fahrenheit scale points to Mars, by virtue of that 32 idea. But that is the realm of Hermes, the thrice great. He travels back and forth from Mars to Earth, and there's lots of mythology that talks about that. Even the Muslims say that a Hermes-like figure in their mythology did that type of thing. They believe that Eden was on Mars. And Mecca has a piece of paradise in it. I digress. But then he used this scientific concept, this physical concept of water at its triple point. Triple, which means it can exist as a gas, as a solid and a liquid simultaneously, but it needs a certain atmospheric pressure to do that. And I'm sure you've heard about it in like physics, if you've taken it in high school, even they talk about the triple point. But they've always showed what that triple point was in a cylinder that's partially evacuated, because on Earth, the definition of one atmosphere is what the air pressure is at sea level on Earth, one atmosphere. On Mars, it's 165 times less. I believe it's 165 times less. That actually corresponds to exactly the triple point of water. That low atmospheric pressure at 32.02 degrees is what the definition of the triple point of water is. So Mars is the only planet in our solar system that can have water exist at its triple point naturally. It can't exist on Earth.
Wow.
It can exist nowhere else in this solar system except Mars. Not only that, he made sure that the phase change from solid to gas, or from liquid, he has at the triple point at 32, it changes from solid to liquid, and then the gas is 180 degrees. 180 degrees. And 180 is a very peculiar number to use, because 180 degrees times 32 is 5,760. And that number happens to correspond to the idea of how many grains there are in a troy pound. There are 5,760 grains in a troy pound. Also, the smallest unit of measurement of volume the Hebrews had was called an egg. And to make a kosher mikvah, or a ritual cleansing baptism, a well of water, you needed at least the same amount of eggs, or 5,760 eggs of volume in a mikvah for it to be kosher. That number is what you get when you subtract the diameter of the Earth. We take the diameter of the moon and subtract it from the diameter of the Earth. In Weird. Miles, 5,760. It's what he's done is sort of an alchemic work. He's made like a tribute to Hermes the Thrice Great, or Harpocrates, and in a scientific way, using his understanding of, and his hidden or his Masonic or his illuminated understanding of the relationship between Earth and Mars, and that being that has control of all that knowledge that they are privy to, and have been for not just hundreds but thousands of years. Oh, I wanted to mention today is All Saints Day,
which we're recording on November 1st, everyone, just so you know.
It's All Saints Day, and All Saints Day is another Masonic thing. Another high Masonic thing happened, or used to happen on this day. It was the day that the Knights Hospitaller, or the Knights of St. John, or the Knights of Malta, used to give the falcon to the King of Spain. Actually, first it was Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. So,
interesting.
The Knights of St. John were the first holy order that were made during the Crusades, before the Knights Templar. And they're still around today. In fact, I think if you look on Wikipedia, they say that they still consult the UN. That's always a red flag.
Yeah, no kidding.
But why? Why did they offer this token? They didn't have to pay any money. They every year on All Saints Day, the 11th month, the pillar month. Get it? They gave a falcon to the King of Spain. Why did they do that? The falcon is a symbol of Horus. Horus is that god which was father of himself. He was the son of Osiris, the slain Osiris, and Isis. Osiris is still he's Horus. And Horus is also known as Harpocrates, or the Silent One. The one who is coming. I mean, there's so many names for this thing, this shining thing that the Masons worship. Of course, this is Red Lodge Masonic worship, not Blue Lodge. You're going to have a lot of Blue Lodge people come to you, like the Masons and get angry. We don't worship Satan. You're just not in the right lodge yet. How could you know this?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we've talked about the creation of our system and of measurements, and really that our universe is rooted in a very specific way. It's created very, very intentional, and of this way that God has used, different measurements and different aspects of our creation to mean very specific things. And it gets corrupted, and that's what Satan does. He comes in and he corrupts things. And so when you see the satanic things of the pentagon and the different numerology and the different measurements that we use, it's based in reality, but it's been corrupted in a way to imitate what God had originally set up, which was a beautiful thing. Satan has corrupted it to become this very evil and manipulative thing. And so that's kind of the point, an overarching theme, if I could use an arch without getting in too much trouble, to talk about, that's the theme, is God created this system of measurement, and it's very, very, it's awesome when you really dive into the different realities that we live in, and the way science and God, the way God's set up science. But then you have to acknowledge that Satan has come in and corrupted our different units of measurement to glorify himself in many different ways. And that's the point of this episode. So, Mr. Flynn, I really appreciate you coming on the Sharpening Report. Where is the best way people can find you and talk about and hear more ideas that you come up with?
If they go to SeriousTwins.com, they'll find my webpage, and from there, click on the link at the top that says Discover Meaning. That's my blog. I usually do 3 or 4 blogs a month. Or I'm starting to do more. And they can also email me. They can get an email, or they can message me on that site as well. I have a Facebook page, but I've been boycotting Facebook lately. I just don't go there very often, so my website is the place to go.
Okay. Definitely, guys, if you were confused at all during this interview, it can be hard to talk about these topics, and it's much easier to read about them. So I strongly urge you go and read through them, and even if you don't agree with it, it's still very interesting on the way the numbers work and the origins of our different units of measurement. So, Mr. Flynn, thank you so much for coming on the Sharpening Report. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, guys, that's what we have. That was our episode today. So remember, Satan and God are dueling over every aspect of our reality, including the units of measurement. And you have to know what is the truth behind it all. And that's why in the Sharpening Report, we talk about all sorts of different topics. So that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I am going to finish my pie since the episode is all over. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you had some pie with me. And I hope you have a great week. Gonna take a bite of this pie that I have sitting here in the intro. It's good pie. It's hard to do an interview with pie just sitting here.